Well, welcome to another episode of the Scriptural Mormonism podcast. I'm your host, Robert Boylan. We actually have a returning guest, a good friend of mine, Amanda, returning to discuss a very interesting topic. Before we do, though, just one announcement, and I will share my screen. On Saturday, August 12th, I will actually have a debate/dialogue with my friend, Adam Stokes, who has also been on this podcast previously. We will be debating whether the Book of Mormon and other early Latter-day Saint texts, such as the Book of Moses, the Lectures on Fate, the Joseph Smith translation, the 1832 account of the First Vision, teach modalism or not. He will be affirming the thesis that the Book of Mormon and other texts teach modalism, such as Mosiah 15, and I will be arguing against that. So be sure to be that episode will be on YouTube afterwards. We might even stream it live as well. So be on the outlook for that. That's been on the works for a while now. So I'm really looking forward to that particular interaction with Adam. So with that done and dusted, as I said, we have a returning guest, Amanda Brown-Maher, all the way from Bountiful, Utah, although originally from Seattle. She's appeared on this podcast before. I think it was episode number 18, Come Follow Me for Women. So, and I'll include the link to that particular episode in the show notes. But Amanda, thanks again for coming back to the podcast.
Thanks for having me. Thanks for taking my probably 2 a.m. text saying, I have an idea for a podcast episode. It's always great to be on here and just chat about religion with you, Robert.
Yeah, that's great. Now, for those who may not have watched the previous episode a couple months ago, how about you give us a bit of a background to you and your education and your interests? Like, have you always been a Latter-day Saint? What got you interested in religious studies, and so on and so forth?
Right. There is a terrible rumor in my husband's family that I'm a Jewish convert, and that is not true. It was perpetuated by the fact that we had our civil ceremony performed by an Israeli rabbi. But no, I've always been a Latter-day Saint, and my great-grandmother joined in the 1920s in Seattle, and we've been there ever since. And now I'm actually in Salt Lake City and adore living literally next door to the what's arguably the holiest space in our religion. So it's great. It's really fun to be here. I have a master's degree in Hebrew Bible with emphases in Assyriology and modern Hebrew from the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I like to tell myself I'm a recovering academic. After my master's degree, I exited the field and I produce events, corporate events now. But I still love religion. I love sharing this. I love studying it. And it's my personal passion. So a couple friends and I run the Instagram account Come Follow Me for Women, and where we discuss all things women related for each week of reading for following Come Follow Me, which it's been really, really great for me personally to first of all have connections that I've made through this event outlet, but also just it forces me to actually study about women that I may have missed during my formal education. So we love doing that. And I also love, having done my program in Israel means that I love going back. So this podcast was actually, I texted Robert at 2 a.m. because I was on Israel time. I was over there and thinking about holy envy and how I incorporate it into my spiritual practices, and really wanted to share with everybody.
Okay, and you kind of touched upon what topic we'll be discussing today. It's holy envy, as well as studying other religions from a Latter-day Saint perspective. So what is holy envy? Maybe you should start off with that, and I'll let you go as long as you want on other topics as well.
I love that. So holy envy is a term coined by Krister Stendahl, who was the Bishop of Stockholm in the 1980s and the Dean of Harvard Religion School before that. And there was, during the building of the Stockholm, Sweden temple, there was a lot of negative press. So he actually gave a press conference related to the building of our temple and had 3 rules for religious understanding. And the first one was, when you are trying to understand another religion, you should ask the adherents of that religion, not its enemies. 2, don't compare your best to their worst. We're all human. And then 3, leave room for holy envy. And by this, he meant that we should look at other religions and we should have some sort of envy for, oh, you worship God this way. That's beautiful. I don't do that. Maybe I should incorporate something that I've learned from you into my own spiritual practices. So it's kind of the process of finding your own faith in other religions while still adhering to yours, which Latter-day Saints, that is our spiritual tradition, right? We have, I looked up a couple quotes from, immediately one came to mind from Joseph Smith, but I had to look up the exact one, or exactly how it was stated. And in 1843, Joseph Smith said, "We don't ask any people to throw away any good they have got. We only ask them to come and get more. What if all the world should embrace the gospel? That they would see eye to eye, and the blessings of God would be poured out upon the people, which is the desire of my soul." And then following up a little more succinctly was President Hinckley, and he said, "Bring with you all that you have of good and truth, which you have received from whatever source, and come and let us see if we may add to it." And so for me, holy envy is this idea of, okay, we have the truth. I was born a Latter-day Saint. I haven't had to bring truth with me, but having been born and raised a Latter-day Saint, I need to go out and find truth other places and incorporate it into myself. And that's something I'm really big on.
Okay, and is there any particular other topics, like its application for Latter-day Saint?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. I first discovered this at BYU and fell in love with it there, with it within like kind of the safety net of professors who are also practicing this. And so I think it's a great study in how Latter-day Saints can apply this. Dr. Eric Huntsman's particularly good at it, among others, but he was a big proponent of it at the time, of just going and go to Ash Wednesday, pick a different Christian church and see what their mass or services are like. Go to Easter Mass. I like Catholicism, so I go to Mass a lot. But go to Easter Mass. Go celebrate Iftar with your friends for Ramadan. Go. We always do Christmas Eve Mass here in Salt Lake at the Cathedral of Madeline. And so go there, go do that. Go see what kind of art these other churches have in their buildings, how they worship God. In Catholicism, it's stained glass, right? For a lot of these cathedrals, and see if that speaks to you. Does that add something to your religious expression? And if it does, go find it, and then start looking at our temple's stained glass. It's different, but maybe it also speaks to you, and maybe it speaks to you in a different way after you've looked at a ton of examples in a cathedral or in the cathedrals throughout Europe. So, and go celebrate Shabbat with your friend or with friends. Go to synagogue. Go see what's there, and why religious people all over the world adhere to these different faiths and why they continue going, just like we do. So, my BYU experience was really great in preparing me for developing this into my adulthood. And in a way that made it okay and that made it safe. I think that's a big concern for a lot of people who are just getting into this. And okay, how do I remain a member and study somebody else's faith, right? How do I remain faithful to mine? And I think that's it was a great environment to kind of see how people I really respect had incorporated that and maintained their own faith. And my answer to it is there are such beautiful practices everywhere. Uh, but there are a couple things that are really unique about my faith that keep me here. Yes, I'm desperately wholly envious of right now Eastern Orthodox Mass. I think it's really beautiful. And marriage rituals, but I have my own marriage rituals. I was sealed in the temple, and I can go out and explore what this religion has to offer and see how they interpret a marriage ritual that really informs how I think about mine, specifically in Eastern Orthodox religion. The bride and groom are very visibly crowned, and I believe in that. I believe that we're crowned to be deities through our sealing ritual, and that's what I did when I married my husband. But seeing it in another religion and seeing how they practice this and how they believe it only strengthens my belief in mine. So I did that at BYU, and then I went to Jerusalem for 2 years for school, and that was an absolute playground for holy envy. I was the only Latter-day Saint in my program, and so I was talking with people who were Catholic priests or who were Protestant ministers in their own communities in Asia and Italy and the US, and then I was talking with Jewish and Muslim friends as well. And it was just this melting pot of religion where I was kind of on the outside. Like I was different, right? I wasn't, well, according to them, I wasn't a Christian, and I definitely wasn't Jewish, and I definitely wasn't Muslim. And so I kind of got to experience everything while being on the outside a little bit, and that was incredible. Specifically with that, I was on the outside of my own religion. The church in Jerusalem, because of the BYU Center and other things, is very limited. And so I got to go to church on Sabbath on Saturday, and that was it for the week. And so I really relied on these other places and these other people who had faith to bolster my own throughout the week because I couldn't talk about my faith. Um, and I didn't have a temple. The closest one at that point was Kiev, and now it's Rome. But I got to go when I'd come back to the US during the summer. But I didn't have this really important aspect of my worship for long stretches of time. And so I started going to these churches. I think there's 2,500 churches or like holy spaces within the old city, which is not that big. So I started going to synagogue. On Friday nights, and we'd get groups together and we'd just go, and I would get to learn about that. I'd go to Shabbat dinner with friends because there was food, and I perennially forgot to buy food before Sabbath, and the stores closed. And I got to see them blessing the mothers and fathers blessing their children. And I got to see this and say, hey, we do this too. It's not every week, but I believe in father's blessings. And I got to sit in these holy spaces with some of the most devout people in the world. And learn from them, even from their gestures, from how they prayed, from what they wore. It was an incredible learning experience. So with that, I'd like to go into a couple experiences that are particularly poignant for me and what I learned, if that's okay, Robert.
Oh, no, that's perfect. I'll let you lead the conversation.
Yeah. So I want to characterize it in terms of what I learned from Islam, what I learned from Judaism, and what I learned from my Christian brothers and sisters, and then how I've incorporated it into my own religious understanding, and how I worship on a weekly basis. So I grew up in a house that my mother's diabetic, so I didn't fast. I didn't have a huge testimony of fasting. I like food and I like eating when I want. And so this, I didn't fast. I guess I believed it would work if I did, but I thought that was not for me. And everything that I had learned about fasting, because it wasn't really taught in my home or displayed in my home, was that you're hungry and you're tired, and it's kind of this grouchy thing we do on fast Sunday, right? And we like desperately count down the clock till 5 o'clock. um and there's maybe not some anger there, but there's definitely a lot of jokes and a lot of angst. And so I didn't feel like I could really learn to fast from my own people, simply because I could only see the joke that it was, not the spiritual principle in what I'd been exposed to. But then I went to Jerusalem, and I definitely didn't fast there because do you know how much I walked? And do you know how freaking hot it was in the summer? But then darling friends of mine invited me to celebrate Iftar during Ramadan with their family. And uh, I went, and there was mountains of food. So I went at sundown to their house. And
Before you continue, maybe for those who may not be familiar with like Islamic terminology, if you were to explain what that is.
yes, thank you. This is my problem. So Ramadan is a religious holiday in Islam, and Iftar is, so you fast when the sun is up. And then iftar is kind of a break the fast meal. So it's the thing that it's the party after the fast every single day during the length of Ramadan, which I think is about a month. And it is a massive party. You get friends together, you get family together. It's a very welcoming time in the city. There are lots of Christmas lights employed, specifically in the colors green or in the color green, and it's very food focused, and it can go till 2 in the morning every single night. And then you get up and you're hungry again and you fast and you do it the next night. But this is how they fast. And I having been from the having had the perspective that I had on fasting, I having grown up with that, I asked my friend Regard, I was like, God, like, don't you just get tired of fasting? Like, you're hungry and it's really hot, like, and you do this for so many days, and aren't you just hungry all the time? And she looked at me dead in the eye and she stopped and she was like, no, this is how we worship our God. Like, this is something I love to do. This is something that binds me to God. Why would I hate that? And I stepped back and I thought, wow, I have some things to learn. And from that experience, I began to fast, and I began to make our break the fast meal like something that's more important in our home. We're having salmon tonight, but something that I've planned, something that I've thought about. And it's really changed my perspective on fasting simply because the Muslims were doing it better than I had exposure to. Um, and I could learn from that. I had holy envy over that. And Judaism, I think we as a church have holy envy over the Sabbath. My high counselor was in a meeting with Elder Cook at one point, and he talked about how the church's push for stricter Sabbath day observance came from Elder Cook spending time with his Jewish friends in LA, who really, really kept a stricter Sabbath than we do. And because that is how they show reverence to God. And I experienced that firsthand. being in Jerusalem. I try to explain that, or yeah, I try to relate Jerusalem now and their Sabbath practices to like 1940s America on Sunday. Everything is closed. The hospital has to remain open, but there are certain provisions for that. Um, Public transportation doesn't work any or stops. Um, and From Friday evening at sundown to Saturday evening at sundown, there's complete reverence. Time stops. You turn off your phone. I'm not very good at that still, but you turn off your phone. You focus on your family. You focus on going to church. You focus on reading scripture and um, enacting this the way your ancestors have practiced Sabbath for thousands of years, in the way that you believe God has instructed you to. And again, I grew up in a world where um, we were pretty strict Sabbath obeyers in or Sabbath keepers in our household, but we definitely don't keep it on vacation and um, different different things. They're a little bit more lax, and being in this place where this is the most important day of the week and where you start saying peaceful Sabbath on Wednesday, according to the rabbis, through Saturday night, in preparation and expectation for the Sabbath, has really changed how I approach it. And I'd like it to change more. I want to be able to turn off my phone for 24 hours and really just focus in on my scripture study and that includes academic studies, but and focus in on my family members and who I can reach out to in my ward and how I can help them, and really focus on where I am at church instead of scrolling on social media like I'm guilty of today. And there's so much holy envy I have for this way of life where your entire week really revolves around the Sabbath and how you're going to spend that time with God. And then finally, for Christianity, I learned about Holy Space from Christianity. There are Protestant sites in the city, and there are Catholic sites in the city, and then there are Orthodox sites in the city um, for Christianity, and then of course ours. And there were a couple young single adults not connected to BYU at Jerusalem at the time I was there. And we would walk, I think it was a 7 mile round trip from BYU to Jerusalem, down to the Garden Tomb, and then up the hill to my apartment. And we would do that every Sabbath because public transportation wasn't running. So we would just walk rain or shine or hot or whatever. And we would take naps in these little like groves in the Garden Tomb. But Christianity taught me about holy space that is not mine. I was a borrower of this space, right? Particularly when I'd go to a church dedicated to the sites. There are two churches where Mary died. We would go frequent them often because they were a little bit quieter, and that's not in my faith tradition. Maryology is not something that's as blatant in our religion as in Catholicism.
Which is something I lament, I will note.
Even though I love her, but it taught me to go into these spaces and see what Christianity has had to offer about Mary. There are so many traditions, as you know, that we don't have for her. And she taught me about religion. These spaces taught me about women's religion and what it can look like. And when we traipsed down to the Garden Tomb, that one's a little bit closer to what we see and what we believe. So it was a safe space for religion. But again, it's Protestant. It's not Latter-day Saint. And so we would traipse down there and we would hear these Protestants singing songs that I had never heard. And it was a very different worship style from what I was used to the point where it was maybe off-putting. But these are my Christian brothers and sisters. And so I'd stop and say, what are they getting out of this? Like, this is almost chanting. What does this do for them? Right. And getting to kind of peek in on them and see the expressions on their faces. This was holy for them. So I got to stop and say, what am I missing here? And I still haven't figured that one out because I really like our music. But there are so there were so many points where I would get to go into this random kind of dusty, dirty, not kept up church because there's no money in it, right? Um, and they don't charge for these churches, so they're fairly derelict. And I get to go in and see these people having the most holy spiritual experiences of their lives and get to say, okay, can I put myself in your shoes for a minute? What are you getting from touching this rock? What are you getting from this space? And how can I join in you or join with you in that in a way that is still in line with my faith? And that's really harder to articulate than fasting or the Sabbath. But these moments of kneeling down at these rocks with these other people and saying, hey, church dedicated to Mary, how are you? What can I learn from my experience here today? Um, has really changed how I approach even like walking into our chapel now. I'm more focused on our sacrament table because that should be my focus in walking into the chapel instead of saying hi to 50 million people like it is. Like my attention gets pulled to. I should be more focused on entering this holy space and preparing for the sacrament. I should have a focal point where I go directly into this church and see maybe not an altar in my religion, but a focal point of worship where I say, hi, focal point, usually the sacrament table, or in our building, we have a really pretty organ. It's going to just play some gorgeous music that day. Like, and I say hello to that. And I try to interact with the space I'm in the way that Christianity has really perfected over time, where we may have a little bit less of a degree for that. So those are a few things that I've learned, and then how I incorporate this into my life in Salt Lake right now, particularly with the temple closed. I live within a couple miles of Temple Square, so that would be an easy focal point for me, but most of it is closed. Is I try to find all the holy space I can here. I'm particularly in love with, I live fairly nearby the Salt Lake Cemetery. So many of the prophets are buried there. And it's not in our faith tradition to go to the graves of holy, holy individuals. But um, in finding, in continuing to find sacred space and incorporating that holy envy into my life, where I said, hey, I've seen this. I've in particularly Christianity and then Judaism, and this is something that's really important to me because of how important it was for other people. I go to these graves, and you can often find me at Eliza R. Snow's grave or Brigham Young's grave, or because I'm visiting Eliza R. Snow and she's right down the way. But or Joseph F. Smith's grave, and I can go to these places and look at these names and maybe read some quotes from them, or read something they wrote, read a general conference address they gave, read any address they gave, and really connect with the person in that space. And that's something that's been very important to my worship here, particularly as the very obvious, easy go to the Salt Lake Temple grounds answer has been closed. Of course, there's also the temple and other things from my own religion that I maintain, but sometimes I can't get an appointment or it was COVID and things were closed. So these other aspects kind of came in and filled those holes for me when I'm in a time pinch or yeah, it's 2020 and the temple's closed. Um, so I incorporate that right now. I again try to learn. Salt Lake is a very diverse place. Particularly with our refugee population. And there are so many people that you can go up to and say, hey, how do you experience spirituality and holiness? And there's going to be an answer, and it's going to be something you never thought of before. And so I continue to try to have holy envy here, even if I am in the center of my my religion. And then how I learn more right now um, in this space, because there's only so many people you can ask, there's only so many people you can meet, is really just finding and reading about spiritual practices and incorporating them into my life in a way that is in line with Latter-day Saint theology. I'm not going to sit in veneration of um, the Virgin Mary because that's not in my religious principles, but I can look at artwork of her and look at the artwork of her Assumption. That's something I believe in. Of course, I believe Mary was exalted. And that's the terminology that I would use in my religion. And I want to see what that looks like. We don't have depictions of that. I have holy envy for those depictions. Let me see what I can learn from that. So it's a lot of art history and looking at religious art. It's a lot of going to these sacred spaces that are around me. We have the Cathedral of the Madeleine close by. We have a Presbyterian church I have not been to yet, right across the street from that. We've got some beautiful Eastern Orthodox churches downtown. We've got a mosque, we've got a synagogue. We have these places where I can go and say, hey, what do you have to teach me today? And how can I incorporate it into my life? There's also reading. I'm constantly reading about, I just finished a book on Eastern Orthodox religion, where there were a lot of points that matched up to things that I believe in my theology. But in reading about its development, it made me think about what I believe differently, and it made me have a bit greater testimony of it. And I don't think I have a book on that right now. No, I'm reading one about the graves of the apostles and these holy places that have been generated around them to see if there's anything I can learn there. I'm not sure if there is yet, but I'm excited to. And these are things that I can bring into my sacred space. So it's a lot of reading for me because that's how I interpret the world, but it's also a lot of seeing how other people pray and how other people meditate and how other people fast and how other people keep Sabbath. And if these things spark testimony or faith in me. Do you have any questions, Robert? Anything I can explain further now that I've talked your ear off?
Oh, no, that's good. Now I think maybe like to throw out a question to you, like how you would interact with this. Like one problem when it comes to say studying other religions is always the danger of trying to compromise. Now you seem to have not done that. You seem to like be able to like sift the wheat from the chaff. You know, like you mentioned like how you can appreciate like aspects of depictions of Mary without like embracing say Immaculate Conception, perpetual virginity, Queen of Heaven in the Catholic sense, you know, and so forth. But one danger, and this may be more like for those who are very ecumenical, would be like jettisoning the unique teachings of the Restoration. I know, of course, like Latter-day Saints, we believe that we're the only singular true and living church. That's section 1, verse 30 of the Doctrine and Covenants, and what God and Jesus said about the other religions of Joseph Smith's day in the first vision, especially the 1832 count, ain't politically correct. So what tips would you give to someone who does want to study other religions and want to be able to like have a better appreciation of Latter-day Saint theology without like say the danger of downplaying or jettisoning say Joseph Smith as a prophet or the need to believe in the restoration, or that this is the singularly one true and living church on the face of the earth?
Thank you for asking that. I think you articulated that really well, and it's something I didn't want to hang up with you until we talked about. So thank you. We I have a privilege here where like I studied this academically for a decade. And so a lot of this the pitfalls you mentioned were kind of smoothed over because I had a critical lens through which to view okay, this is probably true, this is probably not, this is I had that I call it the intellectual sandbox, but I had this ability to kind of play with it, right? Just because I had a framework instilled in me from professors at BYU and then professors at Hebrew University. Um, and it is very hard. I will say that beginning with our own religion is really important, and I don't want to downplay that. If I was working on, of course, I'm always working on my testimony of the restoration. But if I didn't have that foundation, I don't know that I could go off and do this other stuff. If I didn't really believe Joseph Smith was a prophet, or if I was looking for that answer and those experiences, I don't know that I would go to another religion to find that. For me, there's enough there for me to say, hey, this is different. This is important. And this is how I want to believe. And for me, that's Joseph Smith's conception of Godhead in particular. I really resonate with that, and I believe he restored truth in that. That was not on the earth, like you're saying. And so with that, I can go to these other religions and say, okay, what do you believe about the Trinity? And how are you? How are your writings on something that I don't necessarily believe in? Like, I believe in a godhood of three, but I believe in not without form or parts or passions. I believe in a very embodied Godhead. So, what do you have by studying an unembodied God have to teach me about what I believe? And so, I think in going out and finding these things and studying other religions, for me, there is this sense of um, I'm a I'm a wanderer in a strange land, and I'm on vacation here. I'm not. This isn't what I'm going to become, um, because I have that core that is no, no. I believe in Joseph Smith, and or I believe in Joseph Smith's prophethood, and I believe that President Nelson is a prophet, and I believe that the Book of Mormon is restored scripture. So, what can I learn based on those 4 or 5 principles that are rock solid for me in what I choose to believe, what I have experienced is true? Um, what then can I learn from other religions to incorporate into my own theology? And I take or that can inform my theology, I should say. And I take a lot of direction for this from Joseph Smith, right? Um, the Givenses do a really good job in wrestling the angel and feeding the flock with this, which are both books you can get at Deseret Book, and going through and saying, okay, Joseph Smith like ripped this from Judaism and he ripped this from Methodism, and he's totally doing his own thing here, and kind of seeing how he goes out, finds things, and says, hey, there's actually truth here. I'm going to incorporate it into the revelations I've received. Um, and this is still a revelatory process. Now, of course, he was the prophet of this dispensation. It may be a little bit different for me with like no authority on that on a worldwide level, but going out and saying, how does somebody else practice Sabbath? And how can I have, what have the prophets said about it? Okay, so in our faith, we don't go to the store on Sunday. We tend to spend time with our families if they're available. We um, My husband and I go on drives a lot. We'll take a walk sometimes. We'll read scriptures. Are Disney movies allowed? Are they not? I'm not sure, right? What does our tradition say is okay and what is not? And how do I want to elevate this experience? What's missing from my experience in that? And is there something else, some other way somebody expresses how they practice Sabbath that really resonates with what I already do, and how I could improve it a little bit more or how I could understand it better. So it really is finding those things and then bringing them back and interpreting them on your lens, while still remaining appropriate and saying, okay, like I'm not going to go do a full Jewish Sabbath because that's not my religion. That would be appropriation at that point. But I can um, look at how my Jewish friends do practice Sabbath and say, hey, there's something here. Like I should probably turn off my phone a little bit more. Or I shouldn't. My thing right now is I don't want to be on social media on Sabbath. It's not going well. But maybe I should disconnect from this thing that kind of rules my life and I'm looking at right now, because it can never be out of my sight. How do I incorporate that aspect of something that these people do to draw closer to God, to me? Any follow-up questions?
Oh no, I think that's good because one has to be grounded in the restored gospel before they can actually delve into other faiths. There's always the danger of buying hook, line, and sinker some other opposing doctrine because there's a lot of philosophy behind it, there's a lot of history behind it, and so forth. So it's like just speaking personally, like because I'm grounded in say the Book of Mormon and Joseph Smith, as you are. Like when I study other faiths, like say Eastern Orthodoxy, which is pretty cool for Latter-day Saints to study, or say even Unitarianism, you can actually appreciate the good points they bring up and the biblical and historical arguments they may raise, yet be able to throw away the chaff, if you will, as well. So that's very important, because I'm not, you of course are not like under this, but like I have noticed like a number of Latter-day Saints, more and more becoming ecumenical, where and in the modernist sense of ecumenical, not like you can have a holy envy, but more like, well, let's kind of incorporate this and kind of jettison what Joseph Smith taught, which to say it annoys me is an understatement, but there you go. But no, I think that's good. Is there any good books or articles when it comes to say like how to study other religions? Like you mentioned Kirster Stendahl, I'll include an article on the show notes about the concept of holy envy there, but has there been any good books on like any specific topics? You mentioned like say shared holy spaces or other topics that you found useful in your own studies on say holy envy or other religions as well that you would recommend to like maybe Latter-day Saints and others watching this.
A good question. I think I'm still figuring out what that looks like from a book perspective. Um,
Well, if I could recommend one or two, like
yeah.
they were like dialogue books, but I thought they were pretty good. Like in 1997, I believe there was the How Wide the Divide between Craig Blomberg, an evangelical, and late Stephen Robinson, the Latter-day Saint, discussing the differences between their faiths. I thought that was pretty civil. And there was also the book Catholic and Mormon between the late Stephen Webb and Alonzo Gaskell, who himself was a former Eastern Orthodox. Again, they're more like dialogue books, not really holy envy per se, but I thought they were pretty fair and balanced. And also, funny enough, Webb wrote one of the best books introducing Mormonism. It's by a non-Mormon. His book Mormon Christianity that was published by Oxford, I believe. If you want, like, say, a holy envy approach to Mormonism done well, Webb's book by a scholarly Mull is the best book. He gives theological credit where it's due to Joseph Smith about heavily fleshed Christology and embodiment and other topics as well, while still like having friendly critiques of certain aspects of Latter-day Saint theology as well. I thought it was very good.
Um, I think for me, the books I read, I usually have a practice I want to study. So I'm always reading a book about death and graves and how that's interpreted in different religions, because that's what I'm passionate about. So I'm always reading something on that, and I start at one and then I just kind of comb through the footnotes and find another. But there isn't really a rhyme or reason to it. It's very, and I don't know that I'd recommend any specifically to a Latter-day Saint audience, because it's very much for what I'm interested in at the time, and less less a methodical search for these things. Oh, John Levinson's The Love of God. This I'm only part of the way through it, but it is going to be one of my favorite books, and it talks about how Judaism conceives the love of God, and it's academically rigorous and definitely Jewish, but it's a really good introductory text to every page. I'm like, yeah, I totally believe that. Yeah, he's quoting the Old Testament. Of course I believe that. And then there are a couple things where I'm like, okay, like I believe in an embodied God. So maybe that one's out for me, right? Maybe I need something a little bit more physical in how I describe this. But that's a book that definitely generates holy envy for me. And other things are really just on practice. Let me find it. I read one on the Amish faith as well, of this woman kind of needing to slow down in her life and looking, she was captivated. She had holy envy for the Amish, and she didn't end up converting, but there we go. But she went and lived with these Amish families for a bit, because this is something that drew her and something that was going to spiritually edify her. So this one's called Plain and Simple: A Journey to the Amish, and it's by Sue Bender, and it was, let's see the title page for it, for the year. But that was really beautiful, and it can show you kind of how you can have holy envy without um, without throwing out the rest of your life. And in her ending chapter, she talked about, like, yeah, I went back to my life in California, and I drive a car and I wear pants and I don't churn my own butter, but I took these things that I learned and I tried to incorporate them. So that's been a really foundational text for me. See, I always have a book. It just takes a minute for me to remember. So those are two that have really inspired me. And then the others have been a lot more nitty gritty. I want to learn everything I can about X practice. So maybe less applicable to to our audience, but yeah. I think also, and then I'm done, but reading the Book of Mormon every day is really foundational for me. Even if it's a verse or two every single day, I find that consistency really keeps me within my own faith. So I can go out and explore these other ideas and concepts while still having that like absolute tie to what I believe at the end of the day. That's been one of the pillars of my life, and is something that was heavily suggested by Kay Strathern at BYU. She said, if you want to get through a PhD and remain active, you will do this. And that's something that I really believe in, just because it gives you that kind of beacon home to who you are religiously. So that's something that's been really important to my practice as well, which is another book, but our own.
No, that's good. And I really do appreciate you coming on, like, to give an overview, like, say, religious envy and how to study from a faithful Latter-day Saint perspective other religions. As I said, like, in the show notes, I'll include like the previous episode we did with you and your two friends discussing "Come Follow Me" for women, and also include an article about Stendhal's holy envy in the show notes as well. But any other final comments you want to leave before the end of this episode?
Yeah. one of the pillars of my belief in the restoration is that the restoration is ongoing. And that is at a church headquarters and prophetic scale. And that's also on an individual scale. I have to learn about my own religion and become converted to it, just like everybody else does. And what really, really helps me do that is this practice of holy envy. Because again, this is our spiritual heritage. Joseph Smith does this. I feel like he was the best at it, but we could trace other prophetic or prophets who have done this throughout our history. I'm thinking of the changes in particularly the 1960s with Joseph Fielding Smith and his holy envy for evangelicalism. But these things have shaped us. Like the restoration doesn't happen ex nihilo. And I think in our kind of hesitancy to want to branch out into other religions because we don't know where to start and we don't know what that looks like. And are we going to lose our faith if we do this, which are all very real concerns. We miss out on what Joseph Smith was doing and in restoring the church. And I'm brought back to the very silly metaphor in that was taught to me in like Sunday school of, well, the early church was one piece of glass, right? And then all of the martyrs drop off and eventually nobody can hold the glass anymore and it shatters into a million pieces. But those million pieces, yes, of course, Joseph Smith, I believe, has restored the one piece of glass, but that doesn't mean that those other shards aren't there and we can't learn something from them. And that's something that I am really passionate about. And it has only ever strengthened my faith in the restoration because I look at this as through a lens of, okay, like I am part of the restoration. What more can you give me? And I want to say amen. Is that how we end a podcast?
No, but I'll be there first. So there you go. You have that honor. But as I said, like again, thanks for coming on. And I really do appreciate it. And hopefully we can have you on again in a future episode as well on, I don't know, maybe if you want to introduce Acadian to my podcast listeners or some other topic. So
if your podcasters would like to hear a lot of swearing, maybe it would be fun though.
Well, I'm Irish, so that's good.
Yeah, that's true.
Yeah, but again, Amanda, I really appreciate you coming on, and hopefully this will be beneficial to those who listen about how to do properly holy envy as well as study other faiths from a Latter-day Saint perspective and remain the Latter-day Saint without compromising. So again, thanks for coming on.
Thanks for having me, as always, Robert.
My pleasure.